Hello, welcome to Full Record Jackets, the music podcast and YouTube show with me, Phil, and
Me, Ben.
now Ben. You've
Yes.
you've wanted to do this show. I'm not prepared for it, but then am I ever prepared for it? But you want to do guilty pleasures.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
this
Because
is
we've all
this
got
now
them,
a,
haven't
a
we?
confessional? Is this our confessional? Have I got to hear your confessions here?
Yeah. For art thou, Father, I have sinned, and over
What?
the years I have listened to many a record that a man of my stature should never have listened to. And if I tell all my friends, they shall laugh at me for a long, long time.
So you're just going to stick it on YouTube? Okay, come on then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Spill the
Yeah.
beans.
Well, we've all got guilty pleasures, haven't we? I'm sure you've got a few. You know what it's like. You're listening to someone on the radio, and you're like, "Oh, do you know what? I actually really like this, but I'm not going to tell anybody." You know. But I've got a few, Phil. I'm not scared to admit it. I think one of my guilty pleasures, album-wise, is God. I can't believe I'm going to say this to the masses. There you go. Said it. Did you hear that?
It sounded like it ended with an I, but I'm not quite sure. I didn't quite catch it.
As long as I'm as everyone.
No, didn't get that one at all.
It was Lighthouse Family's debut album.
The Lighthouse Family's debut album. Okay. Was that... I don't know the Lighthouse Family discography apart from a few songs that have been on the radio. Was that something to do with Ocean Drive? Or
That's the one, yeah.
that
yeah,
what it was called?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a reason. I had glandular fever when I was 15, 16. And Ocean Drive was always on the radio. And I can't remember the lead singer's name. Is it Tundi?
I really don't remember.
And it just made me want to be on a desert island somewhere. But
so you were lifted, were you, basically?
I was lifted, and there's nothing to dislike about it. I mean, if you're looking for musical genius, there's nothing, music writers. I mean, I use them as a benchmark when I take the mickey out of people. And I did once use the Lighthouse Family on a really poorly written message I used to send to people on a dating website because I thought it'd be funny. Where I basically asked, that I told them that I'd met them, married them, and divorced them all in the same thought. And thank you for all the wonderful memories. You can keep the house in Scarborough as long as I can have my Lighthouse Family collection back. So, but if you're after music that just you can put on in the background and not have to, it's not like Radiohead. You don't need a degree in rocket science to listen to it. And I don't think it's that bad. It's not great, but we've all got them, haven't we? I'll tell you another one, and now I'm confessing to you, oh priestess of Philness. I think there's a song from the Sliding Doors soundtrack by Aqua. Turn back time.
I don't know if I've heard that, or have I heard that?
That's not a bad track. I can listen to that and sort of I feel dirty after listening to a lot of these things, but then I don't feel,
they're
the worst thing in the world.
They're the ones that did the Barbie thing, yeah?
Yeah,
Aqua?
the Barbie thing.
That's not...
Yeah, they did, yeah.
I'm not sure anything could be much worse, although at least when they made that, they must have known they were making total trash, so it wasn't really... it's not as if they tried. It's not as if they tried hard to make something good and came out bad. I think they knew they were doing that.
No, and it's hard to pinpoint Barbie Girl as well because it seems to have spanned various decades and generations, that it just has no reference point anymore. There's not a point where you think, when did I not ever hear Barbie Girl? So, yeah. But yeah, Aqua, Turn Back Time. That's a little bit of a guilty pleasure for me. We've all done it on a Saturday night. We discussed it in a previous show about doing the S Club 7. But I'm just trying to think if I've got any I haven't got any Phil Collins. Oh no, I have.
You did, because we had a discussion about Phil Collins. You ended up
I
getting hold of a Phil Collins
buying.
LP.
I
Yeah,
did. I
yeah.
bought Face Value, and it's all right. And then he does a cover of Tomorrow Never Knows, which is goddamn awful. But I wouldn't say that's a guilty pleasure. I don't think owning Phil Collins, because that came out of discussion for us. But you must have a guilty pleasure. Criss Cross, Jump. There's another one.
I've
Fresh
got,
Prince
yeah,
and Boom Boom
well,
Shake the Room.
it
There's
depends
some more.
it all depends who you talk to as to what you should feel guilty about, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
I was watching a U2 concert last night, bits of it. So, I do quite like U2, but then that would be in some people's eyes something that I should feel guilty about. So, it all depends, doesn't it? But obviously, if we're talking about bands that have, or artists that have very little cool credibility with anybody, I suppose my guilty pleasures tend to be more down the line of 70s easy listening, cheesy, middle of the road radio stuff. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Probably influenced by doing hospital radio, which makes you hate certain songs and never want to hear them again, and also turns you on to certain middle of the road records that you quite like. Which ones do I like that are guilty pleasures? When You're in Love with a Beautiful Woman by Dr. Hook, I like.
Yeah. I've got a Dr. Hook album.
Similar vein, Captain and Tennille. Ever heard of Captain and Tennille? Male female duo, American sort of cheesy middle of the road pop in the 70s. They did a song called Love Will Keep Us Together, which is written by Neil Sedaka and Howard Greenfield, who is one of the great pop writers of the 50s. So I don't think Neil Sedaka's in the same league as people like Carole King and Neil Diamond. They all the Brill building songwriters. I don't think we should necessarily be too guilty about that. I'm trying to think of some of the others.
What about Mark Morrison? Morrison's
can't
debut
say he's ever been a pleasure for me, really. So
I've got his debut album. I suppose in '97, buying Robbie Williams' debut album before Angels kicked off was a little bit of a guilty pleasure. Because
he'd been in Take That.
Yeah. So I suppose that would have been a little bit of a guilty pleasure. But I do have Mark Morrison's debut album, and I do listen to it every now and again. But yeah. Oh God, I'm really confessing here, aren't I, to some god awful stuff that I've listened to over the years. I mean, I grew up on country and western. There's probably a whole heap of stuff in there.
Guilty pleasures for me. Quite like quite a few tracks by Engelbert Humperdinck. Don't mind a bit of that. Yeah. Don't mind a bit of Tom Jones. When Tom Jones was a little bit, cheesy.
My other guilty pleasure.
Go on.
What was that?
Yeah, that sounded like a whoa. So that was your. I know about this one. Wet, Wet, Wet.
Yeah, picture this.
That's extremely, yeah.
That's a real guilty pleasure, isn't it?
It would have been okay until they had that number one record from the Hugh Grant film that was number one for ages.
Four Weddings.
I think that made them. Yeah. I think that really killed them for a lot of people, didn't it? But
yeah. I mean, obviously, I know a lot of Wet, Wet, Wet from growing up as a kid. And you're wishing well, all that sort of stuff. But that album with Julia Says and all that sort of stuff on it, I actually used to quite like. I actually used to really, oh God, this sounds awful, doesn't it? All credibility is. I mean, some people may say that the Pet Shop Boys could be slightly a
yeah, but I think I don't. Yeah, I don't think the Pet Shop Boys are a guilty pleasure though, because the Pet Shop Boys have got quite a lot of cred, haven't they?
Yeah,
I think
what we saying constitutes a guilty pleasure. I mean, I am a massive Matchbox 20 fan, and a lot of, especially, I mean, they're not that big over here, but in America, a lot of American press, I suppose, like, you get here, a little bit snidey towards them, sort of, especially with their sort of latter albums, and have gone a bit more pop orientated, that sort of pop rock sort of thing. I suppose that could be deemed a guilty pleasure. But I suppose they're not bad, are they? Having a guilty pleasure.
No, you don't have. No one should have to feel guilty about enjoying anything, even if you know it's not that great, or that it's something that other people probably aren't going to like. It's all, whether things are cool. Sometimes it's better to be honest about liking something that's not considered cool than to try and pretend that you like something in order just to be cool. I think that's probably better.
I was just about to say that. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there, Radiohead fans, who probably go, "Oh God, I love Radiohead, man. The music's so complicated. I mean, I've got 84 GCSEs just to be able to listen to the opening chord sequence. I mean, man, it blows my mind." And when the cameras are off and they're like, "Oh God, just give me some Westlife. In a little world of our own, I'll take the place no one else knows." Oh yeah, look at me, I've got the Radiohead tour t-shirt, man. I mean, it's so, it's like these people go to art galleries and it's like, yeah, but really and truthfully, all you really actually like is a bit of Tony Hart and Morph. That's all you really like. You're not that bothered about the art. You just want to look cool in front of your friends. So, and I don't mean to slag off Radiohead. I think they're a sort of a pin in the wall, aren't they, for overcomplicated music, or I think so. But yeah, I can imagine there's a lot of them. I've got like Kid A and the Bends and all that sort of stuff, OK Computer, all over here in their collection. And over here is the Westlife and the S Club 7. They're like, oh God. Their friends come round for dinner and they're like, oh God, I've got to have to listen to Kid A. Oh God, how long ago? And then they clear off and it's S Club straight on there. Reach for the stars.
Of course, I mean, it's not just pop with guitar bands. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example of a band that's I'm thinking of a band that's like a classic rock band that's considered to be part of the classic rock canon now, is considered completely respectable to own all their albums. If you see albums reissued and remastered, critics now will give these albums high ratings as being classics. But in this country, particularly in the 70s, they weren't considered cool by a lot of music journalists. I'm talking about Led Zeppelin. And I think this is partly because Peter Grant, their manager, did such a great job of launching them in the US and aimed the start of their career at getting tours in the US and getting so successful there that when they came back to this country, it was basically they were being promoted as, this is the British band that's already big in America. And I think the music critics in this country didn't like that because the critics here hadn't built the band up themselves. They weren't involved in the process of making them big. And so there was a kind of a journalistic reaction against that. And then, of course, the band became a little bit defensive about journalists, and then a few journalists had run-ins with, particularly with Peter Grant's organisation. So I think that was what turned critics to some extent against Zeppelin in the 70s. And so I think the likes of NME and Melody Maker weren't that keen on them at that time. But since then, they're cool.
Yeah. Well,
so,
the music cool press does have a lot to say.
It's not just to do with the actual music. There's all sorts of perceptions that go on.
Well, ZZ Top, we've been discussing them this week. A lot of people probably think that they're quite a comedy band almost because of their beard and sort of quite throwaway, but I think they've become more cooler.
I think to a certain extent as well with ZZ Top, it's the fact that they've been around for so long that people tend to sort of start to respect them again. Of course, the original trio is no more now after the death of Dusty Hill, but they're still existing as a band, I believe. They've got a replacement bassist who was from their organisation, his bass technician. I'm going off on too much of a ramble about them now, but I think they were Well, yeah, I mean, they were successful in America in the 70s as a barroom boogie blues rock kind of band.
Yeah, yeah,
In the 80s, of course, they embraced the MTV era and did all this electronic stuff on their albums. So it was sort of techno rock, and that was massively popular with the public. I'm not sure whether it was critically heavily regarded at that time, but yeah, they had a bit of a cool reception a lot of the time from journalists. But then, yeah, I think they are perhaps considered a little bit more cool now.
yeah,
But it all depends on who you talk to some extent, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah. I wonder if we could do a show one day where we do our sort of top 10 albums that the critics panned but turned out to be monsters. I think we brought it up the other week. I think Bjork's debut album, Rolling Stone, panned it. You know,
Is
they
that
don't always
right?
get it
Yeah,
right.
yeah, that's true.
They don't always get it right.
Yeah, there are albums, of course, by established artists that have been coolly received at the time. That's the case with, let's say, somebody like Bob Dylan, who some of his albums were
Well,
highly...
these lot here.
Yeah. Some of the Dylan albums were highly acclaimed at the time. Others weren't. I'm thinking of things like Nashville Skyline got quite a panning at the time, and a lot of fans didn't like it at the time. But now it's actually very popular, and with the generations who've discovered him since, that country stuff is as popular as much of his other stuff.
Yeah. Well,
So
look at Be Here Now. When Be Here Now came out, Oasis were on that, you know, and they started off with the NME favouring Blur. I remember the Country House Roll With It debacle, that the NME fell on the side of Blur on that one. And then all of a sudden it was all on the back of Oasis. Everybody was championing them. And then Be Here Now came out, massive, huge reviews, 5-star, 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 and then somebody pulled the rug away. You know, so but we'll have to discuss Be Here Now at some point, because
we will, because that was obviously a very much anticipated album. It sold a lot initially, but I think then people kind of went a bit cool on it. Was it just because the Oasis phenomenon with the wider public, that bubble kind of burst, didn't it? And then it sort of became fashionable to criticise it.
And I think they fell out with a lot of people at the time. The popular, you know, Chris Evans, I remember him doing a sketch on TFI Friday where he put a defibrillator on it and said it's definitely dead. 18 months before he was, you know, championing them. And, you know, we've retrospectively looked at that album and we don't think it's as bad as what.
No, it's certainly not that bad. I mean, it's like many albums. There are valid arguments to criticise aspects of it, but it's not a bad record. Overall, there's much to enjoy in it, as much as there is to discuss about what its flaws are. But that can be part of the fun.
72 layers of guitars.
Yeah.
You know, it's. But yeah, I mean, I know we've veered off from our guilty pleasures, but sometimes these little wormholes open up. But yeah, there are a couple of my guilty pleasures for now. We'll probably revisit some more at some other time. So yeah, Lighthouse Family. Big shout out to them. They're not very credible, but to me, they're okay. And yeah, I do have a bit of a liking for Wet Wet Wet's Picture This album. Can't find it on vinyl, very expensive. So I hold my hands up.
Well, with that level of honesty, Ben, I think you have to be forgiven. There's nothing wrong with having a guilty pleasure. Join us next time on Full Record Jacket. Check out our other videos.
Thank you, Reverend Phil.
Subscribe, follow us, like us, share us. Next time, we'll talk about something cool. Until then, many thanks. Goodbye.